Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Trek and Faith, where we not only explore strange new worlds, but we explore the faith that weaves through them. I'm your host, John Lane, and today we are going to be diving into Season 1, Episode 16 of Star Trek the Original Series, the Galileo 7. It first aired on January 5th, 1967, and was written by Oliver Crawford and directed by Robert Gist. The episode begins with the Enterprise on a mission to deliver medical supplies to Machus 3. When Kirk and the crew of the Enterprise discover a planetoid in the middle of a nebula known as Murasaki 312, they decide to assign a scientific team to check it out, consisting of Mr. Spock, Dr. Leonard McCoy, Engineer Montgomery Scott, and 4 other crewmen. However, they run into a storm on the way, forcing them to crash land on a planetoid known as Taurus 2. We then cut to Dr. McCoy and Scotty commenting on the state of affairs, with Scotty commenting on how much of a mess the interior is after the landing, and Dr. McCoy not wanting to recommend the place as a vacation resort, as a way to lighten up the mood a little bit out of a bad situation. However, Spock is having none of it and tells them that their comments are counterproductive for them getting out of there. They assess the damage, realizing that the Galileo is heavily damaged and that they lost a lot of fuel. They fortunate enough to get off the planet, but they would need to shed 500 pounds of weight first in order to do so. Spock responds back with that the weight is equivalent to 3 grown men, while McCoy calls him out and tells him that Spock thinks that people's lives are the equivalent of the equipment used on the ship, with Spock responding back that every piece of equipment on the ship is vital in order to escape, and that 3 crew members must stay behind in order to lighten the load. So again, we're kind of seeing right now that Spock is taking priority over the ship, over the people, which logically speaking is true, but at the same time, not exactly ethically sound. But we'll see his thought process more as the episode goes on. After this, 2 crewmen named Latimer and Gaetano head out to explore the terrain outside of the shuttlecraft, only to find themselves encountering a primitive creature. The creature throws a spear into Latimer, killing him. Boma and Spock come to his aid, with Boma sad about his death, while Spock examines the weapon and notes its similarities to other crude weapons used by other species. Boma finds this highly inappropriate, but Spock responds back with the fact that his concern for the dead will not bring him back. Logically speaking, he's not wrong, however, it's still very unnerving for him to say that directly to Boma. As the episode continues and they are repairing the ship, Boma then approaches Spock, telling him that they need to give Latimer a proper burial. However, following on his logical thinking, once again, Spock states that their efforts would be better used in getting off the planet instead of regarding Latimer's life. However, McCoy tells him that as the commanding officer, it is his duty to hold the funeral, to which he agrees, but tells him that the repairs to the ship take up the utmost priority at the moment. When the creatures start to come back towards the Galileo, they're able to electrify the ship outside to keep them at bay. However, Spock wants to make sure, and he, Boma, and Gaetano set out to use their phasers not to hurt them, but to scare them away, despite Gaetano's disagreement that they should be killed instead. Their attempt to scare the creature off was all for naught, as Gaetano is killed by the creature when standing guard after they thought they had retreated. As Spock and Bowman go to find Gaetano's body and bring him back to the ship, Scotty figures out that the energy from their phasers could give the ship enough energy with the fuel to escape the planet. Spock ends up giving Scotty the phaser to convert for the substitute fuel source, and once again not really showing any regard to the life lost, but rather focused on the task at hand. However, Spock does start questioning his logic a little bit at this point of why his tactics did not work against the creature, and why his use of fear did not make the creature respect him, despite all rules of logic telling him that it should. Dr. McCoy then rebuttals back at him, telling that respect is not always used when being intimidated. When people are frightened, they tend to rebuttal back with an emotional response, and that logic and reasoning when being attacked could very well be the last thing on their mind. So rather than respecting their enemy, they're going to outright attack. Needing to still get weight off of the ship, Spock is then convinced by Boma to give Latimer and Gaetano a proper burial before they take off. Even if it was to get a few more pounds off the ship, Spock has at least changed his tune somewhat on caring for the well-being of others over than his logical first objective, getting off the planet. As Boma, McCoy, and Spock bury the dead, they are attacked again by the creature, with Spock being pinned under a rock thrown from the creature. Despite Spock telling them to leave him to save themselves, McCoy disagrees that they were leaving no one behind. As the Galileo reaches orbit, the Enterprise goes on its course for Machus 3, as Kirk was only allowed to stay for so long. In a last-ditch effort, Spock ignites the fuel and jettisons it into space as a signal flare for the Enterprise to see and come to their rescue. Despite all of Spock's logic dictating that they should take their chances with the remaining fuel that they had, he demonstrated an emotional response of desperation, realizing that logic may not be the say-all, end-all answer to every situation. And so the biggest standout factor I found in this episode was the inner conflict between the crew on how to handle various situations through human ingenuity and emotional response, or through a rigid structure of logic that focuses on the task at hand, but lacks the emotional connection needed to get through the crisis, and can often come off as very cold. Spock's intentions were good, as his logic dictated that getting off of the planet as fast as possible was the best course of action. However, his approach to and the way it affected his crew members was a negative side effect. While logical thinking is definitely needed to make the correct decisions, those decisions should not overstep human ingenuity either. John 11:35 literally states, Jesus wept. In Romans 12, a chapter discussing various humble emotions we can betray to people, verse 15 states, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7 would also talk about how we lay our anxiety and emotion to God, stating, cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. Our emotions should not be guides to act out unusually and make terrible decisions. And for Spock, that is definitely rightful thinking. However, our emotions can also act as gauges as well, in the sense that it helps one to know how they're feeling and how they can use that to assess the situation at hand. Logical thinking and purge of emotion is focused, but it lacks the emotional connection that helps make decisions like the desperation move Spock made near the end of the episode in order to survive. Sometimes the logic is flawed, and sometimes we have to go with our gut feeling in the end. Overall, this episode did a good job exploring how emotions can affect our decision making, whether that be better for worse. And Spock's logical thinking in terms of getting the crew out of the situation was noble, but by showing a lack of emotional response when trouble came around, like the death of the crewman, or being solely focused on getting out of there, it caused him to be cold and a bit self-centered a little bit. It's not until his logical thinking breaks later on in the episode that he starts changing that. However, he's still half human. Showing that emotion and using that to gauge your feelings is not a bad thing entirely and should be embraced when in a tough situation to make it that much easier. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you on the next episode of Trek and Faith.